The difference that doing whatever it takes makes in a startup is the difference between that was a good effort and a good performance and knocking it out of the ballpark.
So Sunita Parbhu is a seasoned startup product executive building high-growth consumer and enterprise software businesses. She was most recently the head of product at CVKey Project, a nonprofit whose mission is to help communities reopen responsibly during the COVID-19 pandemic. Sunita is currently an investor in blockchain companies and is also interested in opportunities for improving wages and income in the field of the future of work. Sunita was founding fellow at NFX, a prominent Bay Area VC firm, and Sunita is a Fulbright Scholar. Her education includes 2 degrees from Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand, another shout out to the Wellingtonians, and an MBA from Harvard Business School. So I'm really excited to both hear what Sunita has to say and just to add her to the milieu of that she can know you and you can know her. So thank you. Welcome, Sunita.
All right. Thank you for the introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here. I think this is a really unique event, and thank you to Leslie and Xavier for putting it all together. So recently, I was giving a talk at Stanford about product management. And when I got to the end of my talk and we opened it up for questions, I was surprised. The first question I got wasn't anything to do with product management at all. It wasn't about virality or how to get your product into the market. My first question was, how have you done so many different things? And it's true, I have done a lot of different things since I've been here in the Valley. The one thing that ties everything together is it's always been really early technology in really ambiguous markets where most people really, there weren't really a lot of answers to be found. So my first job was at Siebel Systems, which was an enterprise software company. It was the fastest growing software company of the time, and we created a market for CRM, customer relationship management software, and we generated more revenue than all of the other companies combined, including SAP, Oracle, and PeopleSoft. We grew that to 8,000 people, and eventually we were acquired by Oracle for almost $6 billion. I worked at Adchemy, which was one of the very first machine learning SaaS software companies. One of our co-founders was Rajiv Motwani, who's a professor from Stanford. He was also the advisor for the Google founders, Larry and Sergey. And that company was acquired by Walmart Labs. I worked on a labor marketplace to help hourly workers find connection to more shift work and make a better income. I did that from seed to Series A, and as was mentioned in my introduction, I worked at CVKey, a nonprofit where we were building not only apps for dealing with COVID, but what we really invented was a privacy-first architecture to keep personal health and location information private, while also benefiting the bigger good of being able to share this information when needed. In terms of Wellington, in terms of New Zealand and where I'm from there, I'm from Wellington. I went to a high school really close to where you went to, Wellington East Girls College, which was up the hill from Wellington Boys College, and went to Vic. My parents were from India originally, and they immigrated to New Zealand. And my first job out of school was I worked at Bank of New Zealand in the really tall building in Wellington. It was my first office job. Unlike a lot of students here, my summers were not, I didn't ever do an internship. I don't think I was ever in an office. I worked in my parents' dairy in the holidays, and I also did things like lino laying and painting houses. So this was my first official job for a salary, wearing a suit. And I met a lot of really good people there, including some people who went on to be really impactful in New Zealand, like Mark Tume, who until recently was the director he was the chair of the board at Infratel, and one of my favorite people, Rob Fife, who at the time was heading marketing for Bank of New Zealand. After a few years at the Bank of New Zealand, I was trying to figure out what to do next. I wanted to explore, and that's how I came up with the idea of coming to the US to do my MBA. And Rob Fife really helped me a lot with that. He helped me write some recommendation letters, and I found my way here. Coming to the US was really eye-opening and really has been life-changing for me. I learned about things that I really had no idea about when I was sitting in New Zealand. I never met anybody who ever built a product, right? So, I'd used software and I'd used products like from Microsoft, but I'd never met anyone who actually made anything. And so I was really excited to learn about startups, about venture capital, and after business school, I came out to the Valley and started working in tech. And so my first job was at Civil Systems. I was hired as a product manager. And so how many people here actually work in software or in tech? Right, so quite a few, but not everybody. So the product management job is a general management job. So it sits at the intersection of engineering, marketing, design, and a lot of different functions. And the job of product management is to help the company to produce something that's valuable for the world, and also which achieves an objective for the company itself, right, in terms of revenue or market share or traction. So that's what I've been doing for the last 15 years. At Civil Systems, it was the right rocket ship to get on. The company was really successful. I ended up being they stack ranked everybody for their performance. I ended up being the top product manager there, and as a result, getting the job of working with the founder and CEO, Tom Siebel, for 2 years. So I saw a lot about how to grow a company, run a public company, and also how to do an acquisition. So when I was thinking about so that's in a nutshell what my background is, but when I was thinking about what would be useful to share today with this group, I kind of was realizing that I didn't always know what my strengths were, right? And I think that's true of a lot of people. I mean, it's true of a lot of the kids and at Berkeley that I mentor and such. We don't always know what our strengths are. And so I thought what I would share today are some of the traits that are highly valued in startups and how that intersects with traits that I see generally in Kiwis. So I wanted to cover 3 traits. The first trait, funnily enough, is empathy. So how many people here have ever used software or an app that you found frustrating, difficult to use, really didn't meet your business needs? I think somebody said Epic. Right. So the reason that you get software like that is it isn't because there isn't any user research. There's an art to it. Right? So the companies do user research, but they don't always get to the heart of the matter. All right, to give an example, I've had a team of people go off and do user research for one of my products and write up the findings and come back, and I've read the report and it looks great. And then I've gone out to talk to actual users. And what I heard there was something completely different. What I heard from them was that there was some critical flaw in what we were doing that meant they wouldn't use our product at all. Right? They were just too nice to say it to our user researchers. I wanted to illustrate this with a story from one of the startups that I did, Next Force Technology. So we were building an app for hourly workers, like people who work at McDonald's, Burger King, Denny's, those kinds of places, for them to pick up shift work at other restaurants and make a full weekly wage. And so we had a killer team. The CEO in this company, this was his 8th startup. His previous startup was sold to Facebook. And so we shipped our first version of the app in a record time, and we deployed it to 12 restaurants for them to start using. We thought it would be hugely successful, and what happened was absolutely nothing. Nobody would use the app. All the managers had said that they loved it, and they smiled at us and happily downloaded it on their phones. But when we looked at our analytics, they were only opening the app 1 day out of 6. Right? So most managers in places like McDonald's work 6 days a week, and they were only opening it 1 day. They weren't using it at all. So for all of our talent, we really didn't get this right. And so we went back out into the field and we interviewed dozens and dozens of managers, right? I did this personally. Our CTO was in the field. We were all out there talking to our users. And what we discovered was this. These managers of restaurants, they thought of themselves as warriors. Right? Every day they would come in, open their restaurant, and all kinds of things would go wrong. There'd be employees who didn't show up, irate customers, being out of stock for food items. Every day they were juggling and heroically getting through the day to get things done. And our app was diametrically opposed to how they thought of themselves and their work. So we took that insight and we redesigned our app, and we put in some new features. One of them was this thing called My Crew. And in My Crew, we put in all 40 of their staff, but we also put in 200 other employees from nearby who would be available to pick up shifts in their restaurant. And suddenly, we've given these guys a much bigger domain over which they were in control. And rather than sort of being the tech people who assumed their jobs were so simple, you could just click a button to do it, suddenly our app made sense to them. So quick show of hands. Before they were opening the app 1 out of 6 days. Any guesses or anybody want to shout out of what you think the number is after this change? Every day, yeah, so close. It was 7 times a day. So they were not only using our app every day, they were even using it on their day off. So for a startup, getting to that insight was life-changing. Right? It took us from being kind of nowhere and completely failed to now on a really strong path for success. And so I tell that story because I tell it to my teams as well, because empathy is really important. And I feel like as a New Zealander, empathy is something that comes from my New Zealand upbringing as well. I grew up in Wellington. It's really diverse. I went to school with people from lots of different backgrounds, from really wealthy to recent immigrants. In high school, I got to join lots of clubs. I joined the Indian club, but I also joined the Greek club, even though I'm not Greek. I joined the Polynesian club, even though I'm not Polynesian. And it's a really welcoming environment. And what you learn from being in an environment like that, I think, and also being in a really small country, in a small community, is you learn to relate to people, right? You learn to notice differences, but be curious about them and want to listen and really go deeper into conversations. And I think that empathy is a Kiwi quality that really benefits folks who do the kind of work that we do in startups. So I'd say that's definitely the first Kiwi strength. And by the way, I'm really surprised that I've met a lot of people who've gone to all the right schools, super smart, know a lot about a lot of different things. But when it comes to empathy and putting themselves in the shoes of somebody else and trying to understand what they might do and trying to predict what they might do, just completely lost. So empathy, I think, is a really big skill and a really big advantage for Kiwis. The second thing I wanted to talk about, which is really important in startups and which I think is a Kiwi trait as well, is doing whatever it takes. And so at Siebel Systems, we were a pretty fast-growing company, but we were still not on the global map. And so we decided, we actually were able to do a global strategic partnership with the behemoth in our industry, which is Microsoft, a $200 million global partnership. And it was my job to launch this partnership. And by the way, I had no marketing background, but we needed this partnership to work. Most partnerships fail, like people ignore them, nothing ever comes of them, but we needed this to put us on the map. And so the vice chairman of the company came to me and said, so we need to launch this partnership, and on day 1, we need coverage in all the tier 1 press, all the tier 1 analysts. We need more than just a soundbite. We need multi-page detailed analysis and reports and glowing endorsements. Okay. So we gathered the team, right? We had, I knew nothing about marketing, but we had, PR people, marketing people, analysts. We got together and we started to think about how we were going to achieve this as still a relatively small company. And, someone mumbled in the back of the room, this would go a lot better if we had Bill Gates come and announce it. So then our people called Bill's people to see if Bill would come over. And the people said, no, they're not going to come back. He's not going to come. So we could have gone back to the vice chairman and said, yeah, it's going to be really impossible. It's really hard. It's just like lower our expectations. But somebody dug out the phone number for Bill Gates' assistant. And then I called Bill Gates' assistant. And we figured out where he was going to be the day before, where he was going to be the day after. And we found a small airport where he could land his plane. And so Bill Gates came. And the difference we blew that launch out of the water. And I tell that story because the difference that doing whatever it takes makes in a startup is the difference between that was a good effort and a good performance and knocking it out of the ballpark. And doing whatever it takes to me is also another Kiwi attribute that I see a lot. Right? I think most people are very humble, and if something needs to be done, they're the first ones to stand up and do it. Also super optimistic. Sometimes that comes from being naive, but naively optimistic, and also creative. So if there's something that needs to be fixed, you'll pull out the duct tape and the wire, and you'll figure out how to put it back together. And the final and the third quality that I wanted to talk about is being direct. So a startup is not really about technology. It's not really about products. A startup is really a truth-finding machine. You start with a vision. You start with maybe some slides. And if you're lucky, you start with a decent amount of funding. But most of what you're doing in a startup is trying not to die and trying to find the truth. You're trying to find a market, product, a customer, and a way to get to market that all works together. And the way you get there is by experimenting and pivoting. And it's not linear. It's very circuitous. But the quality of being direct is essential because you can't find the truth if you can't speak the truth. So if you're in a group of people and you're all trying to solve a problem, a Kiwi is going to be the first one to sort of blurt out, right? That doesn't work, right? That's a stupid idea, right? So if that's you, right? I can see a few people smiling. If that's you, keep doing that. Because hiding problems, right? And hiding problems is the opposite of what you want in a startup. Let's say you've launched your product, your engineers have been working night and day, and your salespeople aren't selling it, right? Or your marketing team isn't able to market it. And when you hear that news, if you ignore it, right? If you let your ego get in front of you, then you're going to do the absolute wrong thing, right? You're going to try and maybe hire different salespeople. You're going to try and spend more money on marketing, right? You're going to burn through your money and your time when really the real problem was that there was something fundamentally wrong with the product or the solution you were working on. So when you bring together a really talented team, the number one thing to do is to make sure that everybody knows what the problem is. If you're going to meetings and people are reporting things like, I did all this great work, all this great work, if they're not talking about what they did, what they expected to happen, and, oh, you know what, I was supposed to do X and I failed completely, right? You want to hear about the failures and why so that you can solve the problems. So what I like to say to my teams is be hard on the problem, but be soft on the people. And if you do that, you build teams that are unstoppable, because no matter how many problems come their way, they're just going to punch through every single one of them. So, being direct, I think, is a Kiwi quality. I know when I first came to the US, I raised quite a few eyebrows because it literally just say, what seemed obvious, like the emperor has no clothes. But the reason I share that also is because you don't always want to fit into the norm, if that truly is a strength. So that's, I mean, I have a lot more stories, but I'll wrap up there. And startups are really fun, but they're also really hard. And these qualities do make all the difference between going sideways, going under, and being successful. And for the Kiwis that are here, and for those who, if you have friends or people who've recently come over to do startups, I hope that these have been helpful insights for you as well. I think I'm going to hand it back to Marguerite now.
It's beautiful. Thank you so much. And we do have a little time for questions, so I'll keep you up here. Do we have any questions? I'm going to start with Jack, and then I'm going to go to Andrew.
Yes. On the ship finding aspect that you spoke about first, you mentioned this feature for micro. I was just curious, it sounds like that's the feature that got you product market fit. How long did it take to get to that feature?
So this is the interesting thing about insights, right? Like, why having user empathy is so important. Because it wasn't, I mean, I don't want to denigrate, right, how much work the engineers did, but relative to everything we had built to that point, the amount of tweaks that we made to our app to produce that feature were very minor. So really small amount of software development effort to get most of the value.
But how long did it take? It sounded like that was the inflection point.
Yeah, no, so how long did it take? So that took maybe I don't know, 6 weeks or something.
I mean, the start of the company.
Oh, to there? Okay, so probably, to the point of that first failure, probably 6 months. And then from that failure to doing the research, another couple of weeks. And then once we found the insight, the thing about insight is it's not just data, right? You have to have some intuition, right? And so as a product lead, you end up having to also go with some intuition, right? And lead the company towards acting on it. So then maybe 2 weeks of development and then launching it. And the other thing I'd say is that, when you launch something, right, always be ready for it to fail. Right, so I like to say you have to be willing to kill your own babies, right? You've got to do everything you can to bring it into the world, but then you have to also be prepared to be doesn't matter how much work we put into it. If it's not working, we have to, kill it and move on.
Hi, Sunita, Stuart. I'm not sure how often you can get back to New Zealand these days, but quite a lot of the young ones coming out of Victoria. My daughter finished there this week, actually. So, but she's not a tech. She's, wanting to come up to the States, get involved in startups. You obviously came to HBS and did the post grad. But what's your advice to young Kiwis wanting to come up and start to build a career or build a toehold in the market here in the tech space?
Yeah, I would say. I'd say get involved in some way. And I would say, compared to when I came out, it's a lot easier to get involved now. I think one thing that COVID has done for us is it's enabled lots of remote jobs. And so I have, a nephew who's a senior in high school at Wellington College now, right? And I'm telling him, you should just, get involved in a DAO, right? Start, you can get involved. You don't have to get hired by anybody anymore. Right? You can start to build, you can get paid, you find your community and start building, start getting involved. That then starts to create a little bit of a portfolio for you as well, and then good things will happen.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Yeah. Deb.
Good presentation, thank you. Did you have any difficulty as a woman coming here as opposed to being a young female in Wellington?
Good question. So I think I recently got some more insight about this because I always looked at my career in New Zealand and I was like, wow, I'm so glad I'm from New Zealand. It was the first country in the world to give women the vote, right? And it's so equal in many ways. My first job, I was a trader at Bank of New Zealand, like probably one of two women traders on the whole floor. And I thought I didn't see any bias, right? What I've learned since, right, especially talking to more women here, is that actually I put up with a lot of bias, right? So an example, so you just work a lot harder to overcome it. And so I think I'd kind of built a muscle around that in New Zealand already. And so when I came here, I didn't really notice it. It's not really explicit, I would say. So it's probably an area that I'm thinking about a lot more. But that's a really good question. Oh, I do say there's an advantage. There is an advantage of being a woman, especially in the kind of role that I do, which is in the middle of a lot of different disciplines, right? So you've got really bright engineers, you've got data scientists, you've got designers. Each of these people are experts in these kingdoms, right? They're such deep experts. And I feel like as a woman, people are much more approachable, right? It's either as a woman or as me, whatever it is. But they're much more willing to talk to you about what they know and what they understand, what their expertise is. They sort of explain it to me in plain English. And that's what allows me to connect the dots, right? And put multiple people from different disciplines together to produce something that's like amazing. And so I feel like sometimes people who are experts can get defensive about what they do. And I think as a woman, like maybe people are a little bit less defensive and a bit more open. But that's just a hypothesis. Divya. I think it can be hit and miss. So I've definitely had friends who went in as the first product person, and really the CEO did not want to stop being the product person, right? And so literally, as a product person, you can't even do your job, right? So that doesn't usually work out. But usually, what I listen for are, like I interview everybody in the company. Like I'll interview the engineers, I'll interview obviously the founders, I'll interview like the ops people, I'll interview everybody, and I'll listen for the kinds of problems that people are talking about, right? And then those are clearly the kinds of problems that product thinking solves. And so if I see that, then I take it on. I also look for that quality of directness, right? I'd stay well away from any team that has a lot of ego or feels like they know everything already. Because it's really hard to apply product thinking in an environment where people aren't willing to experiment and face facts. All right. Well, thank you.